We'll start
therapy,
now.
the voice for humanity.
Hello, I am Dustin Pickering, your host for the Parrot TV Literary Corner. Today we have Jill Ebsworth, who is a retired, having working various jobs throughout her life as a school teacher, a library worker, bookstore employee, and part-time respite worker in home with 2 men with brain injuries. She is married and spends time doing online family history, taking online art courses, reading, and when summoned by the muse, writing poetry. She also sometimes takes online courses from such sources as FutureLean, Domestika, and Commune. Last year, she participated in a 5-year course by Jacqueline Suskin on Commune called Every Day is a Poem. At the end of the course, she compiled and published a chapbook of her selection of 50 poems submitted by class participants with over 1,700 entries, and Jill was fortunate enough to have one of her poems selected and published as an honorable mention. Thanks for joining us today, Jill. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great, and congratulations with your honorable mention there. So how does that feel for you to be recognized amongst 1,700 poets?
Oh, it was pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. I wasn't terribly happy with the poem. As I said in my note to you, with that course, we just did them fast and there was no talk about editing. So if I'd known I was going to be published, I would have edited a bit, but it is what it is.
Sometimes that happens, I guess, sometimes maybe after time, you may be more pleased with it than you could have been with an edited version.
True. That's true.
That's the case. So I'm curious, when did you realize how passionate you were about poetry, and what did that feel like? Did you discover a poet that sparked your curiosity, or was there a mentor of some kind?
Well, I think poetry's always been a part of my life. When I was a young child, I'd spend my summers with my grandparents in Victoria, and my grandmother had a book called A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I absolutely devoured that book. And I nearly wore out her copy, so she gave me my own copy. And I got it out the other day, and looking back on it, some of it's pretty awful stuff, but it got me into poetry. And then my father was the biggest influence. I wrote a poem about him and his influence on me. Would you like to hear that?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, it's called My Father Was a Welshman. My father was a Welshman, the only living Welshman who couldn't sing, he used to say. But his music was in his speaking, in the slight lilt of his lyrical Welsh voice, a voice I would dearly love to hear again. From him, I learned to love the sound that words can make. I learned to listen for sonority in speech, for cadence, for flow, and I came to cringe at language ill-used and careless. He was a collector of words, the bigger, the odder, the better. Words like discombobulated, triskaidekaphobia, the fear of 13, anti-disestablishmentarianism, and his favorite, floxy-noxy-nihil-pyrification, the esteeming of something as worthless. A poet's mind, heart, and soul my father had. Not surprising, for his family tree was sprinkled with bards, uncles who sat in Eisteddfod chairs, and other kin who were lauded for their englen, a poetic form which is to the Welsh perhaps what the haiku is to the Japanese. If ever he put poem to page, I do not know, but every speech, every paper he wrote was filled with quotes from poems he loved, flowing with the fluency of his own poetic musings. I absorbed his love of words and the beauty of their combining with the very air I breathed. I knew the poets he loved, poets of the Great War that ended just before his birth, poets of his own native land, and even those of the conquering English, for poets aren't usually concerned with making war and effacing other cultures. I hope wherever he is beyond the veil of this living, that he knows the gift he gave me, and that he is pleased to see the seeds he planted bearing fruit. Any gift of poetry that I may have, I owe in great part to him, and with these words I pay him tribute and give him thanks. That kind of summarizes the greatest influence, I suppose, on my poetic development.
I like the poem. I like that it's very concrete and direct, and it's obviously a tribute poem to someone meaningful and it explains exactly why your father was meaningful to you in poetry in terms of language and learning and so forth. And I think it's a lovely poem. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So do you have any current favorite poets like that really influence and inspire you?
It's really hard to pick. I mean, everybody adores Mary Oliver, I think. And I really like Jane Hirshfield a lot. There are a lot of poets. I follow Parker Palmer on Facebook. I don't know whether you know about him, but almost every day he publishes a poem by somebody. So I get a good collection of poetry through his postings on Facebook, and that's really wonderful. Good exposure.
So you just kind of take a generous sampling of what's out there and whatever is presented, and you just observe that. And does that you ever find that you are inspired by reading another poem to write your own poetry?
Oh yes, absolutely. And the little poetry group that I belong to, we inspire each other quite often as well. If somebody writes a poem, that may trigger something that somebody else writes, and so that's good too. And I'm inspired by observation as well, just things I see, and then I jot it down on an envelope or a scrap of paper, and then I may not find it for a couple of years or something, but yeah.
Then you get another poem out of that, and you find it and you're like, oh, okay, I forgot about this. This is an interesting concept I neglected.
Yeah, there's a little one I wrote a few years ago. I was out for a walk with my dog, and there was a smashed pair of sunglasses lying in the gutter. So I wrote, "It's an odd world. It's an odd world we live in. Down the street from where I live lies a flattened pair of sunglasses. Why do we call it a pair when it is but a single unit? But odder still, how did it come to be that there are 3 lenses lying in the street?"
That's cute. I like that. I think it calls into question some of the things we take for granted, and makes you reconceive of the the framework there. And I think that it's funny too, because use a broken pair. Now there are 3 lenses on the ground, so it's cute. I like that. That's
points
like a
out
little
things, things we can so easily overlook too, that could be fodder for a poem.
So when did you come across the Lethbridge group that you're a part of, and have you been a part of other poetry circles since you've moved around quite a bit?
No, I haven't. We've lived in Lethbridge for about 35 years, I guess, and I became friends with Kat Karasage, whom you have already interviewed, and one of her friends suggested that she start this poetry circle, and the idea wasn't not to write poetry, but that we would take turns once a month. Each of us would present a poet or present poems on a theme or something like that. So that's how we got started. And because of being exposed to poetry that way, I think we were all inspired to write our own. And then Terry Petts joined our group, and Terry is a marvelous go-getter. And because she loved poetry so much and loved this little group that didn't meet in the summer, she decided to start something she calls Owl Poetry. And this was started at a local restaurant called The Owl, and we met once a month for poetry. I think she told us she was only booked for one night, but it was such a success that the restaurant owner said, "Do you want to do this every month?" So we did.
Were you nervous when you first presented for the group?
I was terrified. In fact, after the first night of Owl Poetry, I said to Terry afterwards, "Well, I think that was fun, but I'm not sure I'll come back. It's just too hard to get up there and expose my soul in front of strangers." So, but I did come back. I'm glad I did as well. And we're now into our 2nd year, but of course we're only meeting by Zoom, but it's still working quite well. So
when you first started writing and reading poetry, did you find, other than your close relationships, like other peers that were into poetry as well, and how did those interactions influence you?
Gosh, I don't think so. In my teens, I wrote a bit, but I certainly wasn't aware of any of my friends writing poetry. And it's always been basically a private thing. I would write poems and maybe show them to my husband. But until I got into this little poetry group and into the owl poetry, I never shared anything I wrote.
That's interesting. So it was quite a long journey before you actually opened your poetry to some, I guess you could say, public consumption.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I had a bad experience when I was about 8 years old. I was in grade 4, and it was art class, and I was busily painting lovely landscape with mountains and everything. And the teacher came along, whacked me on the head and said, "Is that all you can do, draw mountains?" And I internalized that as a message that I had no creativity whatsoever. And
Right.
that basically stuck with me for a very long time. And it's just since I've been exposed to these people and to Kat Karasage, who is also an artist, that I've begun to free up and explore creativity with great delight.
And so do you find it therapeutic and say freeing and great delight? And so obviously this is a very positive thing. I mean, how else can we encourage this in other people? How do you feel that you could encourage creativity from a positive lens, approach other people in your circles or in your family or whoever else may be?
Well, I honestly believe that everybody is creative to some extent. And I would say just go for it. Of course, the inner critic is the hardest thing to deal with. And if you can silence that voice somehow, tell it, "Thank you for your input, but I'm doing this." And even play with your inner child and come out and play. That's really good. But I know with art, for example, I joined a little group that Kat Karasage was running, and we started with what's called a smash book, where you take a composition book and you just splash color on the pages. And so I found I kind of enjoyed this color. And the more you get into working with color and working with painting, you realize the emotional connection. And I think poetry is the same, that poetry is a marvelous outlet for exploring emotions and expressing your emotions and trying to understand what you're feeling about things. So art and poetry connect that way to me.
So you also do painting. How would you describe your painting?
Oh, I still describe myself as an absolute beginner, and mostly I do paintings from online classes. I take, there are a couple of big painting classes that I take, and each week there's a lesson or two, so you just do whatever the lesson is. But this was one, for example, in it. This is a book, course called Life Book, and this was a painting that was sort of an homage to Van Gogh, and a tree, sort of in his style, sort of.
And you did, that was one of yours?
Yeah,
I love it. It's beautiful.
Thank you. And then this one was by a Danish woman named Ida Anderson Lang, I think her name is, and she does these sort of ethereal watercolor paintings. So this was her lesson. So that's just a sort of example. So mostly mixed media. Yeah, so I haven't really done anything that I would call original to me. I'm still trying to find my style and learning a great deal, but having so much fun with it. So that's
Absolutely.
what counts.
That's the point, I think, is like you say, coming in contact with your inner child and just letting it flow out.
Exactly.
And that think that makes people a little more open to experience and a little more relaxed as relating to other people as well. You feel a little more comfortable within yourself. So, when you're creating, do you have themes that you like to explore in your poetry?
Oh, I think I heard Jane Hirschfield ask that same question, and she said that while she was writing, she didn't realize that she had themes, but looking back, she could see that there were themes that were coming out. And I suppose I have I've done several poems about grief and death. I've done several poems about gratitude. Would you like to hear one of those, or?
Sure, feel free.
Okay, this one I wrote quite a while ago, I think nearly 20 years ago. It's called Death Stopped By. Death stopped by the other day. I felt I had no option but to ask him in. I sat like stone and watched him sipping tea and crunching cookies. Looking up, he said, "Oh no, my dear, I haven't come for you." Fear wrenched my heart, my thoughts on those I love. Again, death sought my eye and said, "My dear, it's just a visit." I saw that he had changed. The solid, black-walled form whom I'd led in was now benign, an old man dripping crumbs, kindness in his eyes, good humor in his face. "I'm not at all what people think," said he, and I saw that it was I, not he, who'd changed, the pattern of my vision settling now, colored shards in a kaleidoscope. "It's all in your perception," he said, pleased with my catching on. "I'll leave you now and let you integrate this afternoon's delightful call. I'll come again, of that you can be sure, and someday you'll come with me, knowing who I truly am, unafraid to take my hand, trusting me to lead you on."
I really like that one.
Thank you.
Interesting, because you're face to face with death, and metaphorically, and you're the one that changes, and it's not exactly as you present the character of death. He's not exactly what we expect. He's
right. Yeah, perception change.
Right, and I think that's also true. It's not, what we think. Sometimes I've heard a lot of poets describe death as sort of a constant companion and friend in a way, because you realize how mortal you are. You're more likely to be open. You're more likely to want to be adventurous and live the life to the fullest.
Exactly.
I think
and
that's
the older
very
you get too, I think the more it behooves us to think about death, and because it's coming for sure. Nobody gets out alive.
Do you find that poem more true now than when you wrote it?
Yes, I do. And I come back to this poem quite often. That's the other thing about poetry. I find poetry, and even my own poetry, sometimes helps me realize that there's something other than what I might be feeling right at that moment. So if I'm feeling really depressed or really upset about something, I can find a poem by somebody else or by me that brings me out of that a bit and broadens my vision. So
I think that's very true. And I find that I describe it as sort of like a, subconscious speaking to you in a way,
yes,
that you're pulling out your own emotions out of your own psyche. I mean, there's so much that we experience we don't know we're experiencing in our life,
exactly.
and in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And when we write, you look at your writing, it seems foreign. You ever find that it feels very foreign to you when you first write it? Maybe
exactly.
like 2 months down the road, it's like,
yeah,
wow, I understand this now. It makes sense.
And,
so you're a little bit ahead of yourself in writing.
Yeah. I've also written things that I look at a few years later and think, wow, did I write that? So, yeah.
It's a very strange experience, almost like, there's some little, like, being tracking us, and, as we're writing, we're kind of carving a path, It's very interesting how that works.
Absolutely.
And I had an interesting question about, when you were working in retail as a librarian or as a bookstore personnel, did you still have time for writing, and did that cut into your energies a little more?
Oh, that was before I was writing, really.
Okay.
When I was a kid, I mean, I've always been a bit of an introvert. And when I was a kid, I would spend my evenings mostly sitting in my room writing things. I have no idea what I wrote. I threw that all away. I wrote stories. I don't remember writing poems, but I really don't remember. So I guess I've always had a writer's impulse, but it got squashed quite a bit. But it's come out, so.
So you find being in a group that's positive and affirmative to your writing is been constructive for you to bring out the inner writer.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the other thing I would say when you were asking about encouraging people to be creative. If you can possibly find supportive people, supportive group, it really helps. And this group, this Owl Poetry that is in Lethbridge, when we were live in the restaurant, we had, I think Terry told us over 150 different poets who had participated at various times. And now that we're on Zoom, we're not having that many, that we're usually about 8 to 10 on an evening, but we're getting a lot of people from other places. Somebody in Lethbridge will invite a cousin from Philadelphia or a friend from Montana or something like that. So it's good. And last time we did the Owl Poetry, we had a lady join us. She didn't put her video on at all. And she said, no, she didn't want to read her poems. She didn't do that. But after we'd had one round of us reading, and our host, Terry Petz, asked her if she'd like to read, she did read, and she was phenomenal. And everybody told her how much we'd enjoyed her poem and how much we liked her voice, and her reading was excellent. And so she joined in for the rest of the program and read us a few more poems. So it can, that's all it can take sometimes. It's just that little bit of encouragement, that little push. Go ahead, you're in a safe place.
We used to tease some of our people that would come into our readings and say, this is the good kind of peer pressure, don't be afraid. We kind of tease a little bit into trying to get up on the stage. And we did we don't do it anymore because of COVID and because there were fewer and fewer people coming for some reason. But
exactly.
So how do you feel, as far as COVID, like how has this affected you personally as a creative person, and how do you think the world is being affected creatively, and how do we see the systems changing, and there's so much despair and so much going on all in the world at once. I mean, how do we continue to be creative and be resistant to that and stay positive?
Well, that's really hard. I hope that COVID and the isolation of COVID is giving a lot of us more time for creativity, and giving us a chance for an outlet in art or in poetry or in writing a book or reading or whatever that's somehow creative. And I hope that will flood out into the post-COVID world, that people will continue to be creative and continue to celebrate creativity, because obviously the pattern we've been living in, the total materialistic, got to make a buck and a faster buck, and it doesn't matter who you step on, that world isn't working. And so I'm really hoping that all the poets and the artists can give us new life.
I hope so too. I hope we I've said for a while now that I think there's a renaissance coming. We have all the tools at hand, the print on demand services are there. Now we have Zoom here, and we have all the opportunities to have these conversations and broaden our horizons. And I'm feeling pretty hopeful, even though there's so much despair. I mean, people are being struck with illness, and there's wars going on, and we just are totally uncertain as to what's next. Economic collapse is going on. I think the fruit will be born from all of this. It's something that has to keep humanity alive. How are you personally coping with a lot of this negativity and stress in the world?
Well, because I'm an introvert, I don't mind staying at home. I do miss my friends, though. I really miss getting together with friends for even a cup of coffee or whatever. But I'm enjoying the time to paint or write or read or whatever I want to do. I wrote a little poem about this called Life in Time of COVID. Would you like to hear it?
Sure.
It's called Life in Time of COVID. In this liminal time between what was and what will be, humanity waits in parentheses. Our headlong lust for progress paused. How this sentence in our human tale continues is mostly up to us. Will it end with a period, a full stop, that's all, folks? Or will there be a comma, a semicolon, to indicate the story somehow continues?
That's interesting. I love the way you use grammar in that.
Yeah.
In the way I mean, a poem is grammar a lot, so that poem, like you're using grammar to express life and, be
Yeah.
metaphorical about, say, for instance, parentheses.
Yeah, and thinking
Uh,
about life as a story that's being told, our
right.
individual stories and the whole human story and the whole universe story, as it were. Yeah.
Hmm. So when did you write that, and what was the process like? Did you go through an editing
Uh,
through that, or did that just kind of
I
happen?
I wrote that just after Christmas. Yeah, I think that I hardly ever can sit down and write a poem to say, oh, I want to write a poem about such and such, or I'm given a topic, write a poem about this. Occasionally that works for me, but mostly it just comes. And I will be doing the dishes or brushing my teeth or whatever, and some idea comes in, and I grab whatever paper or pen or my phone or whatever and scribble down a thought. And maybe the whole poem comes right then. Maybe sometimes I have to develop it a bit, but that's yeah, it's mostly inspired. I heard Jane Hirschfield say one time that she thought poets maybe shouldn't sign their names to their own poetry because their contribution in writing the poem was only part of it.
Hmm.
And that the other part is, of course, what the reader or listener brings to it. But then there's that inspiration part too. Where does it come from? I don't believe it all comes from up here.
I actually agree with you. And one of my recent collections, I use lowercase and uppercase I as a sort of a struggle between my ego trying to assess the poem and the poem itself unraveling. And I thought that was kind of a fun play with language
Yeah,
and grammar.
yeah,
So, and I totally agree. It's a process that is inexplicable by psychology or neurology or any such disciplines. I think it's I don't know, God maybe,
yeah.
or the mutes or whatever dynamic
The,
energies that make
yeah,
life.
the
You
muse,
know,
the universe speaking through us or whatever. Yes. Yeah.
where do you see yourself in like about 5 years as a creative, not only as a poet but as an artist? Are you still going to be promoting work? Are you going to take a break?
Well, I hope I'll keep going as I am. I seem to go through dry spells sometimes. I think most creatives do, but there are ways of, of trying to jumpstart that. And I hope I'll keep writing and keep painting and keep. I hope I'll still be alive in 5 years. The way the world's going, you never know. But
Never know. I mean, it's really tough right now, and it's very uncertain times.
it
And
certainly is. Yeah.
so, what are you reading right now that's it's keeping you alive and moving?
In books, at the moment, I'm reading a book. I'm actually rereading a book by Dr. Gabor Mate called When the Body Says No, which is, I can't remember when he wrote it. It was a few years ago now. Dr. Mate is a Vancouver physician who is well known for his success in treating addiction. But When the Body Says No is basically a look at the connection between what's happening in the body and emotions and psyche and spirit. And it's the body-mind connection, as it were.
Hmm?
And before that, I read a Brene Brown book, Living in the Wilderness, which is I think it's called Living in the Wilderness. It's something in the wilderness. Really, really good. I read cozy fiction, cozy detective fiction, mysteries too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to a lot of audiobooks lately too, and sometimes I just sort of browse through the collection at the local library on the audiobooks. Of course, you don't have to go to the library, you can just download it onto your device, and
Mm-hmm.
finding a lot of things very interesting there.
So you got a new avenue opened up for you, in spite of all the darkness out there now. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
that's
Exactly.
wonderful. I'm glad that you were able to join us on the program today. We have about 8 minutes, so
Okay.
you want to say, any last words of wisdom to impart to the viewers, to other artists, to fellow creatives out there who want to maybe open up a little bit more and have had such negative experiences of people judging them? How do you overcome that?
That's hard. That is really hard. I think there are various psychotherapeutic techniques, some of which you can do yourself, some of which you need help with to overcome that. Depends how strong that inner critic is and how strong that negative voice, that you're not good enough voice is. It is hard. And like I said, if you can find a supportive group, even one other person that will listen to you and say, gee, that's good, or I really like that, or I liked what you said about such and such, or this phrase or something, any kind of encouragement, because it said we're Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. That comes from Dr. Rich Hansen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. We're wired for negative. So, 100 people can say they really liked your poem, and one person can say that sucks. And that's what sticks, is the one negative.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And that's if you can sort of back off and say, okay, that's my reptilian brain telling me that. I don't have to listen to that. Let my reasoning and my rationality come to the fore, and I'm going to listen to those 100 people instead.
But just pay attention to the good critics and the positive, and use your discernment is what I tell people a lot of times is, exactly. You feel like someone's just being a jerk, then that's just them being a jerk. And someone's saying, well, you can improve here. Here's a good way to elucidate this point or illuminate this phrase a little bit and make it clearer. Then that's somebody you can say, oh, well, thank you very much. It's a voice of gratitude to the people that are out there inspiring and inspiring confidence in people, and doing things like what Gary's doing and what you're doing and what Kat's doing out there in Canada. So you guys keep moving on. And if you want to suggest others to get on our program, feel free. We'd love to have more of you guys talk about your experiences and, overcoming negativity and everything else out there, and whatever creative projects are being pursued, we'd love to help promote those.
Yep, so exactly. Well, I'll spread the word to the others. Terry and Kat have already spread the word a bit. You mentioned gratitude, and that too is another way to deal with the negativity, is to focus on the positive and be grateful for what you do have, and look for the positive and be grateful for it. I think gratitude is So I wrote this poem. If I wanted to read it for our ending.
Okay.
Are we at that time then?
Yes.
Yeah. It was with the group that Kat has, this little poetry group, and I was presenting an evening of Jane Hirshfield's poetry, and I wanted to end on a blessing, and I looked to see if she'd written a blessing poem, and she did a blessing for marriage, which wasn't quite what I wanted. So I wrote this poem. It is inspired by one of her poems called The Poet, and this is called A Blessing for the Poets. May all of us who feel the deep of life, who sense the mystery just beyond our grasp, who love the words with which we ponder, who bear the urge to paint in words the visions, inklings, intimations that come to us, come through us, bidden or not, may we be blessed.
Amen.
May our lives be blessed, our homes, our hearts, our hands, our pens and pencils, blank bits of paper, our waiting keyboard. May all our tools be blessed.
Amen.
May we be blessed with beauty. May we be blessed with light, both within and without. Blessed with eyes to see and ears to hear, both within and without.
Amen.
Hearts to know and a safe place to be. May we who gather here to share the poet's words, to share our words, our longings, our deepest fears, may our gatherings be blessed. May all be richly blessed who have a poet's soul and pour it into words for this world's bettering.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's beautiful. And I think it's a great point to end. If you want to say thank you or share some words of appreciation and gratitude for people that have influenced you and pushed you along, feel free to do that now as well.
Yeah, well, I obviously say thank you to Kat Karasage and Terry Petz, and hope people will listen to their interviews with you. And to all the women in my little poetry group, they are so supportive and so encouraging and inspiring. And thanks to everybody who has the courage to set words down on the page and speak them out, speak their story, tell their story. And thank you to you too.
Thank you.
For
We're
this
glad to
program.
have had you. So excellent discussion. And as William Blake said, what hand dare seize the fire? And I think that's a lot of metaphor for dealing with, grappling with these holy mysteries of writing and
Right.
universe, and why we are here, why we are human, why we exist, and so forth. So it's been wonderful talking with you, Jill. And
Thank you very much, Dustin.
And it's been the New York Parrot Literary Corner, and I'm Dustin Pickering. We were talking with Jill Ebsworth today, and we had a wonderful discussion. If you missed it, it'll be on YouTube. And please, if anybody out there has a little extra to spare, we are in need of some things. So it will be at paypal.me/nyparrot. It's not necessary to join us on the show, but we would definitely appreciate that, and our viewers. And also, we're looking for 1 million subscribers. So subscribe to our channel, leave us a few comments, drop us your thoughts, tell us what you think, and subscribe. Please do not forget to tell other people about what we're doing, because we really want more people on the show. We're giving a platform right now during these times of COVID and international conflict, and we're having some conversations about creativity and the arts and so forth. And so thanks again, Jill, and thanks to our viewers for listening in. And we hope everyone has a great day. This is the only show that is daily and that is global arts community. It's building community. So we're not only doing this for ourselves, we're doing this to build community for creative writers and creative pursuits. So please keep on the button there and keep watching our program. Thank you very much again.